Hello and welcome to this fireside chat at Raisina Dialogue 2022. I have with me a very young and bright tech entrepreneur from Nepal, Sixit Bhatta. And his claim to fame is that he has figured out a solution how to get around Kathmandu and outside Kathmandu, where the traffic can be terrible at times. And he did this by figuring out how to use people with two-wheelers, motorcycles, get them to give you a ride. So you have to use his app, and through the app, you get to hitch a ride around and across Kathmandu. How did you figure this out, Sixit?
Thanks, Kanchan. It's a pleasure to be here. To begin with, look, like you just said, Kathmandu has a terrible traffic. But at the same time, we also have large number of motorcycles. So if you were to look at the streets of Kathmandu, and you see 8 out of 10 motorcycles going by, you'd only see one person, right? But you'd at the same time witness a sea of people trying to get inside a public transport, which is literally non-existent in town. So we thought if we could utilize that spare capacity at the back of a motorcycle for the point-to-point mobility of people through the use of the app, we thought this could be a solution for people in Kathmandu to move from point A to point B. So that was the premise of our solution. But when we delved deeper into what we were doing, we figured out that in cities like Kathmandu, or even say Kanpur, or even dense cities of India, people literally do not have that freedom of mobility, right? If you think about the Ubers of the world, it adds convenience to people to move around in cities where they can easily find public transportation, where they can easily find cabs, where they don't have to haggle. But in the cities that we live in, what we felt was people didn't have that freedom of movement to move from point A to point B at any given time and at any given space. So if you look at the app, well, it's a similar app that you see around in Delhi or New York or any other places. But the foundations of our belief do not only come from allowing people with the convenience of going from point A to point B, but about enabling people with the freedom of movement. And that's what we try to do.
So you started in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get around to motivating people to join this, join you in terms of, offering to let people hitch a ride on their bike?
Mm-hmm.
We were chatting and you mentioned that most people who own a motorcycle, they would be disdainful towards the idea of being a cabbie.
Yeah. That's correct, yeah.
And they would think that you were insulting them. So how did you work around this psychological barrier? How did you get people to register themselves with you?
That's a very interesting question, Kanchan, and thank you for bringing this up. Look, the kind of entrepreneurship knowledge that we live with is that an entrepreneur solves a problem. But I think, for me, entrepreneurship is more about changing human behavior in mass, right? Well, it would have taken a lot of guts to have tomatoes for the first time for a person who's never seen tomato, right? So in our context, we felt, okay, just having a solution or an app would allow people to just hitch a ride and make an income. But what we quickly learned was giving a ride on a motorcycle to make an income was not an existing behavior, right? And at the same time, using an app and taking a ride with an unknown person to go into a certain destination was not an existing behavior either. So, we do have bike taxi cultures in Thailand and Bangkok, in Southeast Asia, but that did not exist in Kathmandu. So what we had to do was we had to change that behavior for a large number of people. And the way to do that was to create a sense of dignity in income for them, right? And to begin with, we had to incentivize these people. Now, think about the kind of campaigns that the development organizations and NGOs run just to change behavior of people in terms of how you need to wash your hands, right? And still, there are billions of dollars that have been spent. So for us, it was a much more challenging behavioral change. Just like you said, people don't grow up to become a taxi driver, and let alone being a bike taxi driver, because in countries like ours, unlike the West, we do not have that dignity in work and dignity in labor. But at the same time, for the passengers who wanted to use it, because it was new, the behavior of getting into a ride with an unknown person was questionable to them. Even though when they took a cab, they were still taking a ride with an unknown person, right? So it was more of a behavioral change because these kind of psychological barriers exist. Just for example, people fear flying more than crossing the street, where there are more people who are killed crossing the street than flying on a plane, right?
So, as of today, 6 years down the line, how many bikes would be registered with you?
We do have more than 100,000 bikes that have been registered over the years with us.
And on an average, how much would, say, a biker would take home from this service?
It depends on the amount of work that they want to put in, right? Right now, we also have other players who have come into the market. But on an average, they can make up to 2,000 to 3,000 rupees a day. 3,000 rupees would be roughly 1,900 Indian rupees.
Which is a decent income.
It is, it is.
So, do you now have people who would, say, take a bank loan, buy a bike, and join your service?
They have been taking loans informally because the access to finance when it comes to purchasing motorcycles is much more easier because the motorcycle distributors themselves offer that access to finance. So we've seen in many cases where people have purchased bikes, but even without doing that, Kathmandu has a lot of motorcycles. Every young person buys a motorcycle because our public transportation system is totally broken. So what they would rather do is, if they've already bought in a motorcycle, they would rather use it to make an income out of it.
And what do you call your service?
It's called Tootle.
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 And you mentioned that now you have other players in the market. Give me an example.
We have players from Bangladesh, and we have players from I think it's a Russian company out of Silicon Valley.
So you actually have a Bangladeshi company going to Kathmandu and setting up a service over there?
No, it was a company that's already set up, and they have extended their services to Kathmandu.
And this competition, is it fair competition, or they try to undercut you?
Well, look, what happens in countries like ours is, we didn't establish a startup. We take a lot of pride in saying that we started an industry, right? To begin with, for an entrepreneur, the biggest challenge is to change that behavior and to prove that something happens. So when Wright brothers flew the plane for the first time, that plane would not be the one that would transport millions of people today. But you rather remember Wright brothers than you remember, say, the founder of Boeing or Airbus. So, but at the same time, the kind of challenges we face is we have to build our indigenous technologies, indigenous operations. Given the situation of the challenges that we face in getting the FDI and the investments. So in that sense, I think having a competition allows us to learn from them and have us do better in what they're doing. But at the same time,
And I guess also investors take you more seriously when they see more than one player in.
absolutely, that's correct.
Has it been a problem financing your project?
Well, it's been a challenge in terms of financing. Because,
What I mean is investors, investments.
look, our market is big, it's large, but our country is very small. Nepal is the 48th largest population in the world. But given that we are between India and China, we look very small in population. So there is a comparative disadvantage in population. But if we were in Europe, we'd be a pretty large country. If we were in Africa, we'd be the 10th largest country in Africa in terms of population. And at the same time, we're also a very, very young country. It's 5 years younger than India. So it's because the investments are flowing in India and China, Nepal seems to be forgotten, even though it has a large potential that can be unlocked because of its demography and the size of population itself. We face these challenges in investments and the know-how in our country.
And what about government programs? Are there government programs that sort of prop you up?
I think this is an interesting perspective, Kanchan. I think we do not have very specific government programs in Nepal, like you have in India, like Startup India, and I think the Prime Minister of India has made it a mission to have startups grow and deliver in cutting-edge innovations and technology and solving the great problems that you have here. So we do not have something like this, and this is a model that I think we could replicate. And given that we are in Raisina Dialogue right now, I think we need to have some kind of partnership with Startup India or the hubs in India where we can learn or even collaborate to establish something that has worked for you. And I'm sure given the cultural proximity and the geographical proximity we have, if it's worked for you, it'll work for us either.
But has anybody tried it and failed? Because I can't quite imagine there being barriers.
I think that the conversations have started, but we have not been able to materialize something at a scale that has been done in India.
Okay. We met for the first time when we were doing this series called Himalayan Dialogues. And there we specifically talked about how technology can be deployed to the betterment of the people of the Himalayas. And although this is something which is often talked about, but still a huge gap remains between the manner in which technology has been deployed, it has been adapted, and also, as we just talked about, the poor funding that is available. If you compare it with the rest of the country. Now, this is something very intriguing because when we talk of climate and technology, the Himalayas are the most horribly hit by climate. If we talk of technology and resilience, Himalayas are the most vulnerable. If we talk of technology and development, again, Himalayas needs that. Do you see that happening? Quickly, because we are running out of time.
I think, Kanchan, there is a question that needs a bit of more, a little longer answer. I think, look, with the climate change, the bigger challenge we face in urbanization and food security, one of the bigger challenges. I'll take it just as an example. What technology basically does is it allows, with the flow of information, the flow of products and services, and the flow of payments, right? Now, if we're talking about, say, just in case as an example, food security, in the plains of Nepal, there are a lot of food that's produced is being wasted because the producer is not getting the right price, and the consumer who is buying in the cities are paying exorbitantly high prices because there's a lack of flow of information, right? And even if there were a good flow of information on the pricing of these products, there is a lack of logistics that would allow the transport of these products and the transport of payments.
Is there a move towards this harvesting of technology?
It is. But look, if we're looking at the way the technology is being developed, we have payment platforms, we have logistic platforms that are building up, and we have information platforms that allow for the information exchange. What we need in our economies and in our countries is how these platforms come together and provide this holistic technological solution where people have a one window into solving all these problems and challenges.
But the good news is that it's happening.
It is.
And the even better news is that young people like you have now stepped up to the plate, and you are putting in the effort, the resources in creating platforms like Tootle, and that should by itself inspire others. Thanks a lot for joining us over here, and I promise you next time I come to Kathmandu, I shall use your app and move around the city on a bike.
I promise you, if you use the app, I'll get you on my own car as a driver.
Then what's the fun? Thank you so much, Sixit.
Thank you, Kanchan. It's a pleasure.